Good evening, everyone. It's Meir Weinstein and Mayor Jolowitz. We're going to be discussing tonight a very serious topic. It involves pro-Hamas gangs in North America. They're in every single Western country, and their intention is to kill Jews. They support the assassination, the murder of two Jews last week in Washington, D.C., just outside of the Jewish Museum in Washington. These were two staff members of the Israeli embassy in Washington. And I monitor, other people monitor as well, these Hamas gangs, these pro-Hamas groups and individuals in North America. And they have come out full endorsement, and they believe that that has to be the next level of their so-called activities. Mayor, let's talk about this pressing issue. I remember back in the day of the JDL in the early days, in the 70s and 80s, we were monitoring. We thought there was this threat of these neo-Nazi groups, and we were very involved back then. Mayor, the floor is yours right now.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing that you and I share, that we've been observing this now for quite a long time. As I said to you off air, when we used to be young and pretty, we were concerned about it. Now that we're old and pretty, we're still concerned about it. But to be very serious about it, I just want to do a quick juxtaposition of the anti-Semitism. Let's take the 70s and 80s, as you mentioned, as opposed to today. And one could do this type of juxtaposition going back century after century after century. Nothing has changed when it comes to human nature and its attitude towards the Jew. Let me just give this by way of contrast. In the 1970s and 80s, to use that as an example, when we first became engaged in fighting the scourge against the civilized part of the world, the anti-Semitism was, by and large, significantly an anti-Semitism that came from the right. The anti-Semitism that we see today is anti-Semitism from the left. Mm-hmm. And allow me just to give a few minutes of background, and then talk about how things have actually changed. In the late 70s and early 80s, there was an anti-Semitism in America, and it was in evidence somewhat the same way in Canada as well, which the economy seemed to dictate people's emotions. Mm-hmm. And when the economy was somewhat suspect, 1979, 1980, 1981, the victim, as has always been the case, was the Jew. In the United States in 1980, because I used to lecture about this regularly, in the United States, I could pull 4 or 5 names of people who ran openly as neo-Nazis. They were either American Nazi Party, the National Socialist White People Party, whatever, the KKK. Didn't matter what the designation was. They were proud to be Nazis, white supremacists, anti-Jewish. There was J.B. Stoner in Georgia, who ran for lieutenant governor, who ran for governor, who ran for the Senate. And I could tell you the numbers without spending too much of the time. And that is that he pulled in 40,000 votes. He pulled 48,000 votes. And running for lieutenant governor in 1974, he pulled in 73,000 votes. Here's the key. He pulled in 73,000 votes in a state that had less than a dozen registered neo-Nazis. The same thing could be said of Harold Covington, ran for attorney general in North Carolina. 1980, pulled in 56,282 votes in a state that he was the head of the National Socialist White People's Party, the Nazis. In a state that had less than a dozen registered Nazis, he pulls in 53,000. And the Anti-Defamation League said, well, he lost because he lost in the general election. Right. I used to argue that when a neo-Nazi running openly as a neo-Nazi pulls in 53,000 votes, he didn't lose. We're the ones who lost. He won. Gerald Carlson. Here's an interesting one. Gerald Carlson, Mayor, was running for Congress at the time. It was the 15th district. It was It was reformulated today. It's the 12th district. It included Dearborn, Michigan. Dearborn, Michigan. And Gerald Carlson gets 53,000 votes, almost 54,000 votes, running openly as a Jewish anti-Semite, former KKK person, neo-Nazi. Dearborn, Michigan, of course, today is the epicenter of anti-Jewish Arab activity. How ironic that is. Let me give one more example. Tom Metzger, San Diego County in California. He ran, actually won the primary, and when he ran in the general election for Congress, pulled in 53,000 votes as well, same number, and we're told that he lost because he didn't win the election. One more, and this is a very important one. It's the fact that collectively, in 1980, to use as an example, there were over 520,000 votes that were collected by candidates who were running openly as neo-Nazi candidates of one form or another. And we were told by the Jewish establishment and by the establishment at large that they lost. None of them were actually elected. And the argument that you and I used to make was when people running openly as neo-Nazis in areas where very few actually were known to be neo-Nazis, they didn't lose. Now, thank God, I mean, the Jewish Defense League at the time certainly took care of some of the problems. The economy got better. People stopped blaming the Jews and everything else. Just one last fact, and I'll turn it over to you again, is in 1980, for example, there was a lot of literature that was being passed out at the time of elections, and it was a vitriolic anti-Jewish piece. It was vicious anti-Jewish. It was passed out by the right wing. Where was almost all of it manufactured, printed at the time? In Lincoln, Nebraska. So the right wingers were printing in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was being disseminated to various parts of the United States. The irony is, who was paying to have this literature manufactured at the time? It was the Arabs. It was the Arabs. The connection that we saw during the Holocaust between the Arabs and their support for Hitler against the Jews seemed to have a thread that ran even into the 70s, 80s, and today as well. And no one is willing to say it, and today as well, that the Arabs and the neo-Nazis have a collective enemy that they target. I know I keep saying one last point. Let me make one last point. One last point is the organizations at the time, which were quite open in criticizing the white supremacists, we're talking about organizations, the Anti-Defamation League and others, the Southern Poverty Council. All these people went after the right wingers. They all went after the right wingers. The Southern Poverty Law Center was notorious for going after the right wingers. Today, with anti-Semitism manifesting itself in a much more significant way, where are they? Where's the Anti-Defamation League only began to criticize the protest when it was being criticized for not criticizing the protest. So it's remarkable that there was a National Education Board which criticized the right wingers as they should have in the 1970s and 80s. Today, silent. It's freedom of speech. These people have a right to purvey their genocidal ideology. So it isn't just the fact that there's anti-Semitism which has reared its ugly face again. It's the fact that the establishment has failed us again. And it isn't just the establishment. The media isn't doing what it needs to do. Academia is certainly not doing what it needs to do. The whole university structure isn't doing what it needs to do. And American Jewish organizations are doing far, far too little.
You know, we just had a walk for Israel in Toronto. Amazing turnout from the Jewish community. They say it was almost 60,000 Jews who came out. And there's approximately, I think in Toronto, 200,000 Jews. So it's a high percentage. And you could say that there's some Jews who are sick and old or, away, couldn't make it. So, I mean, it's a phenomenal turnout. But there was no representation from the federal government there. There was no official letter from the federal government recognizing this, a letter from the prime minister praising the march, anything. This happened not so many years ago, that the prime minister would make these statements or these letters would go out. And then certainly from the provincial government, there would be representation. There wasn't any. And certainly from the mayor's office, there was no representation at the walk either. So, but the police allowed Hamas supporters to be on both sides of the street, so the Jewish community had to walk through a pro-Hamas gauntlet during the walk. And the messaging from the Hamas supporters is the same messaging as the murder of the Jews in Washington just last week. So we're entering a phase of uncharted waters. Did we believe it's going to come to this? Yes, we did. And it's through immigration policies, letting them in from countries where no Jews live, and they hate Jews, and they promote Holocaust denial, and they want the complete eradication of the Jewish state in any size.
Right.
And those are the people who are out in the streets protesting, in quotes, against Jewish events or any event that has any representation from Israel. Mayor, they're talking about murdering Jews, and there are no consequences going on. If there was a KKK organization that talked about assassinating and murdering blacks, not just black leaders, blacks, period, randomly, the authorities would clamp down, and they'd be arrested, they'd be thrown in jail. If there was any attempt to go after the LGBT community and disrupt their events, it wouldn't happen.
That's right.
Only with the Jewish community. And we have our Jewish community leaders that unfortunately they're not speaking out properly for the Jewish community. And that's where, in years past, the Jewish Defense League would fill that vacuum. Mayor, where do we go from here?
Isn't it ironic, Mayor, that I was speaking about a juxtaposition? I'm going to do a juxtaposition much more recent. It's remarkable that Harvard, I'll use that as an example, and it's only one of many. It isn't just Harvard. Harvard, which has Jews to thank for so many different Nobel laureates that they produced under the banner of education of Harvard, that there were Supreme Court justices who were Jews, who, again, it's that Ivy League pedigree. They were okay getting the credit for the success of those Jews, but when it comes to saving Jews from the anti-Semitism, which they are very much part of, they seem to be not only silent, they seem to be almost complicit with the other side. It's remarkable that the Jewish student on Harvard once was 22% of the population at Harvard. It's now 5%.
5%.
And replaced by foreign elements, financed to some degree by Qatar and others of that ilk. When I talked about a juxtaposition, let's not go back to the 70s and 80s, where I contrast the fact that anti-Semitism then was the right wing, and today it's almost exclusively left wing. The Anti-Defamation League and others are almost happy to see an element or two of right wing, so they can say, see, it's on both sides.
Right.
It is not equal on both sides today. It's from the left. And what they're doing is they're playing us. But allow me this last juxtaposition. The juxtaposition of the Biden years in press, where there was a famous thing. I just did a lecture, which and it's available, by the way, on YouTube, where Joe Biden is trying to get 1 million votes registered in Michigan. I mentioned Dearborn, Michigan, which voted for Gerald Carlson then in 1980.
Right.
And what he did is he does a commercial in which he said that we don't learn enough about Islam, that Islam should be taught in the public schools of America, that we Americans need to bring ourselves closer to this wonderful, wonderful religion, and so on and so forth, which was a scam. And Jews voted for him anyhow. It's remarkable. So the juxtaposition is this Joe Biden appeal to the Muslims saying, we want more of you. We need to hear more of you. We need to associate ourselves with the religious that you purvey, which is so beautiful. Compare that to the comment that we heard just yesterday by the special counsel to the Deputy Attorney General in the United States, Leo Terrell, who used to be a leftist. Leo Terrell came out and basically said, if there's going to be anti-Semitism, we will find it, we will expose it, we will prosecute it, and we will convict. And remarkable. He is stronger in his determination to stop it than any Jewish leader that I know, with one or two exceptions. It's remarkable. So the juxtaposition doesn't have to go back 5 decades. It can go back to a year ago, when we had another president in play, or at least his handlers, his puppeteers, and they were the ones who actually were running interference, were giving cover to those people who are the anti-Semites today. They need to be called out, they need to be exposed, and I'll use this word quite delicately, they need to be crushed. They need to be crushed.
Jewish organizations, when they have an event, bring in somebody from Israel to speak, or someone who's advocating for Israel, they're doing something that has never happened before. This is since October 7th, 2023. You have to pre-register. They're making the location secret. I'm thinking a big mistake. Make everything public. We should not get into the mindset of hiding.
That's exactly right.
And let's take it on.
I'll remind you of the case of the Nazi march in Skokie in the late 70s, where the ACLU defended the Nazis' right to march against Jews with signs calling for gas the Jews. And the Anti-Defamation League, in its ultimate wisdom, came out and said that the response of the Nazis then was that we should simply, those people living in Skokie, Illinois, and the reason Skokie was used because Skokie had a disproportionately high percentage of Holocaust survivors who were living there at the time, disproportionately high. And they said that the proper answer to the Nazis is simply draw the curtains and ignore them. That was the Anti-Defamation League's attitude then. It is their attitude today as well, until they're criticized, until certain people say, we're not going to give you the check anymore. And therefore they come out, Greenblatt comes out with his phony empathy for the plight of the Jewish people that he helped create by his association with all these fraudulent Muslim groups that pretended to be moderate. When I say fraud, they weren't fraudulently Muslims, they were fraudulently moderate. We helped create this. And the only answer, the Democratic Party, a favorite phrase of mine is one more point. So I'll say it again. A favorite phrase of mine is, it's remarkable that this, in essence, could be stopped almost overnight. It could be stopped overnight. The way it could be stopped overnight, and I literally mean overnight, the American Jewish population is 1.8% of the general population, not the 2.4% that other organizations, it's 1.8%. The American Jews contribute over 50% of the dollars raised by the Democratic National Committee for its coffers. If American Jews stood up and said, no more, we refuse to finance the Democratic Party because you guys have almost colluded with the enemies of Israel, it would end tonight. If American Jewish contributions, and we've seen cases where it's happened, if American Jewish organizations, American Jewish individuals, patrons, benefactors said, not another penny to any Ivy League school or any other school, which doesn't do everything it needs to do in order to stop this, no more, it would change overnight. So the American Jew, in essence, has a certain power which he is afraid to exercise, because Jews, going back to even at the time of the Holocaust, we don't want to make this a Jewish war. Well, God damn it, this is a war against the Jew. Yes. And you need to wake up.
Absolutely. Meir,
okay.
Thank you. We're at the end. We covered a lot. we'll take it up again. We'll have another segment. But this is very important, and we're going to push for change. There has to be change.
Yeah.
In all Jewish communities. We can't take it, and they're not leaders. It's like the Judenrat during the Holocaust. These are serious times right now, and we got to take the reins.
Yeah.
Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.